Chapter 17. St. Alamon's. Jaden could not help but be amused, though he dared not show it. The story of Captain Tevius and his small group of followers had long been a source of humor to the citizens of Eridan, and of constant irritation to Ekenroy. Tevius was born into a wealthy family in North Calas, and grew up fascinated with tales of wizards, knights, and heroes. When a dragon named Monworm killed his family and destroyed his home, he swore vengeance on the creature. He was just a boy at the time, and Sir Ekenroy was the greatest knight in the court of Cragmire, king of North Calas, who ruled the large kingdom from the palace of the Golden Dome in the city of Garban. Ekenroy slew Monworm, but shortly after had a falling out with his king, and some time later appeared in Crysin to offer his services to King Urien. The young Tevius trained as hard as he could, and became a knight himself in time, but could never understand why his hero, the man who had avenged the death of his family and saved North Calas, had left them. The story went that he confronted King Cragmire on the matter one too many times, and, after harsh words, was banished from the kingdom on pain of death. He dispatched himself immediately to Eridan, where Ekenroy had been granted the title of Crysin's first man-at-arms for his courageous deeds in battle at the Split. King Urien welcomed Tevius into the ranks of his personal guard on Ekenroy's recommendation, but it soon became apparent that the young knight was unfit for the job. According to eyewitness reports, Tevius would take orders from no one but Ekenroy, not even from Urien. The king and his first man-at-arms, who had become inseparable friends by this time, agreed that something needed to be done about the excitable young man, so they sent Tevius to serve under Gustavus, whom Urien had recently appointed governor of the south, in Brineport. Their hopes were high that the change of scenery would do the young man some good, and that the clever governor could find ways to utilize his talents and give him new direction without Ekenroy around to distract him. They even promoted him to captain, thinking the extra responsibility might help. He was already an excellent swordsman and a brilliant tactician, after all. The plan backfired miserably. Upon arriving in Brineport, Tevius immediately began to spread the word of Ekenroy's greatness, recounting the story of his famous battle with Monworm, and other tales of Ekenroy's grand heroics that were based very loosely on reality. He developed a following of penniless young daydreamers who had nothing better to do than listen to his passionate ravings, and they began a sort of cult. Gustavus, who was turning out to be a genius at trade and economics, was unfortunately not very skilled at instilling discipline, so Tevius had free rein in the city. Unfettered from authority, he began to make frequent trips to the capital, his entourage in tow, on any number of random errands that he was able to convince Gustavus were necessary for the safety of the South. Once, it was rumored, he even managed to sneak into Ekenroy's private quarters at Crysin Castle in the guise of a servant. Eventually, Ekenroy had enough of running into Tevius and his men around every corner, and threatened him with time in the dungeons if he did not desist his incessant stalking. He did not. After a few weeks spent in a dreary cell, the young, handsome, charismatic Tevius gained a reputation as a martyr for his unnecessary suffering. It seemed the only choices Ekenroy had at that point were to put up with the nuisance of the man's constant presence or have him discreetly killed. Finally, a miracle happened in the form of a young lady, who distracted the unruly youth entirely. The tale quickly spread to the farthest reaches of Crysin, and beyond, of how the great General Carthaginian's fiercest admirer had finally been defeated. It was even put into a play by a comic playwright, with the names and locations changed, and performed outdoors at the West Bank main stage in Eridan. Ekenroy had declined every invitation to view a performance. "The invaders are under the command of a man named Norden Merk," Tevius informed the gathered assembly when everyone had arrived at the makeshift headquarters. Once a storeroom in the eastern barracks, maps now lined every inch of one entire wall, and a rectangular table surrounded by simple wooden stools resided in the center. Spurion, Pathos, and Quandus sat together on one side, across from Jaden, Garad, and Zurith Pool. Tevius and his companion stood directly across the table from Ekenroy at the front of the room. As an official recruit in Crysin's army, Cedra was no longer granted the same privileges as when she was merely a traveling companion of the prince, and therefore Ekenroy refused to show favoritism by letting her attend. "I know Merk," growled Ekenroy, "a deserter from the Iron Legions of Irnor. He's well trained and completely ruthless. Gustavus had better be careful with that one." "The governor has done well, fearless one," said Tevius. The troops of the enemy, after ravaging Celis, struck south with a mind to crush all resistance. We harried them with fresh cavalry and archers day and night, always holding our main force in reserve. By the time they neared the bay, they were already weary and in no mood for a long siege. Men from as far as Flint answered the call of our governor, and before long it became evident that our forces greatly outnumbered theirs.
Did Gustavus strike back?
Indeed, Dragon Slayer. We caught them off guard with a massive assault, and drove them back the way they came, as far north as plundered Celis, where they now sit cowering behind the walls of the south and central citadels. Eckenroy sized up the young captain for a moment, a measure of doubt evident on his broad face.
"What is your name, soldier?"
he asked Tevius's companion, a dark-complected man with long black hair.
"Sergeant Yorvin, sir. Do you agree with this assessment, Sergeant?"
"More or less," the man answered, casting a dubious look to Tevius.
"Although cowering may be a bit deceiving. There have been losses on both sides, but we do seem to have the advantage for the time being. A smaller force, all on horseback, detached from the main and retreated immediately back to Eridan. We suspect that Merk may have been among them, but it also may have only been a ruse to make us think he was among them. We can't be sure."
Even as Yorvin spoke, Tevius was removing a rolled parchment from a hard leather case. "With your permission, Great One?" he asked. Eckenroy merely glared until he unrolled a detailed map of Celis and the surrounding terrain and spread it out on the table. "The bulk of our forces are positioned east of the Willow Bar, on the south side of the city. Gustavus has sent another force, at least as large as that holding Celis, north, where they plan to cross the river at the shallows and block the road back to Eridan. If the enemy force occupying Celis attempts to flee to the capital, the northern force will meet them head-on, while Gustavus immediately crosses the river and moves to attack from the rear. Supplies in Celis are dwindling at best, so the enemy will need to move soon, if they have not already done so." Eckenroy looked to Yorvin, who nodded his confirmation that it was true.
"But the enemy has prisoners," added Yorvin. "The crazed folk who survived whatever it was that happened in the north. Gustavus thinks they may offer to trade them for passage out. Or they may have orders to kill them one by one until Gustavus agrees to their terms," said Eckenroy. "That would be more like Norden Merk. How many hold the capital?"
"Less than 1,000, Tevius said quickly. "That is the primary reason we have come. If you were to make straight for Eridan, even with a small force, it would be yours for the taking. Of course, once they see that the Dragon Slayer himself has come, they will surrender immediately. It is likely you will have no need of—"
"Our scouts have spotted no more than 1,000 enemy soldiers in and around Eridan," Yorvin interrupted. "If you have a large enough force to overrun the gates, the odds might be in your favor. The gates, though, as of course you know, are quite formidable."
Tevius glared at the man, but said nothing to contradict his assessment. "Were there any Facilians in Merk's company?" asked Jaden.
"Facilians? No, Highness."
A hidden force could be out there, then, waiting to ambush them at exactly the wrong moment. Suddenly, Jaden was struck by the correlation between their present situation and the Droka game Jean du Zahezar. Still, no sightings had been reported, and the possibility of taking Eridan with no more than a small skirmish was more than they could have hoped for. If the report was accurate, and he had no reason to doubt it, then they could be in control of the capital in as little as 3 days.
"My lord, how do you wish to proceed?"
Jaden thought about the people in the wagons, the homeless refugees that Grislin's spell had left to wander alone. He thought about the people not yet discovered that must still be out there, lost, frightened, starving maybe. He thought about the filthy little girl with her ragged doll, who had been taken in by the widow of a wool merchant killed in a skirmish with the trolls. He thought about the people of Celis in the hands of a ruthless, invading army. He thought about his parents. "Unless you can think of a good reason we should remain, we march tomorrow, at dawn."
"You heard His Highness. We march at dawn."
There were a great number of preparations to be made, so they focused the rest of the meeting on the practical aspects of getting everyone ready to leave on such short notice. The specifics of taking the city and the likely siege of Crysin Castle would have to be worked out on the march. Riders were dispatched to inform the other nations that Jaden was alive and well, and close to regaining control of the kingdom after Grislin's betrayal. Garrod raised a small fuss at this, voicing his distrust of their neighbors, but was ignored. The men chosen were instructed not to lie, but to paint as pleasant a picture of the truth as they could. Jaden did not want anyone to think that Crysin was in a state of total anarchy. The wrong sort of people gravitated toward the turmoil that war created. Another party of 10 veteran soldiers was picked to escort the young runaway Droka back to their home. They would head south in the morning for the Eastwood Trail, and then make for Hagmere. As much as Jaden liked Guan and Zaria, he could not say that he was sorry to see them go. The responsibility he felt for the two was an unwanted weight on shoulders that would have plenty to bear in the upcoming weeks. And the fact of the matter was that they just did not belong here. They did not belong in the cruel world of men at all, in his opinion. Their place was safely under the mountain with family. Spirion called one of the men bound for Druania aside, giving him a special set of instructions that he did not make known to the rest of them. Jaden was a little perturbed that the wizard would give orders to his men without informing him what those orders might be, but let it slide. He needed the wizard, and after what they had been through recently, he truly did trust the man with his life. A little over half of Mora's army, about 4,000 in all, composed of cavalry, archers, and light infantry, better suited for the swift march than men carrying plate armor, would be entrusted with retaking Eridan. They would cut northwest through the forest at first light, to Halyon's clearing, before turning west on a direct approach to the capital. With any luck, they would take the small force that occupied the city completely by surprise. Hours later, when the planning was over and runners had been sent to inform all of the right people what was required of them, Spirion informed Jaden that his presence was no longer necessary, which was the wizard's subtle way of telling him to go back to his room. He faked a yawn and excused himself. As soon as he was out of sight, he dismissed the guards that had been assigned to escort him to his chambers and continued toward the inner keep alone. A feeling of restlessness had descended on him, and he decided to take a small detour. It had been a long time since his last visit to the walled city, and he figured that there could be no harm in some simple sightseeing before dark set in. Besides, he could not possibly be tired tonight, with the dream of regaining his homeland so close to becoming a reality. And so, he set off down a random side street with a newfound spring in his step. The street he had chosen, simply labeled Pinecone Lane, every street in Mora had its name carved into the stone of the buildings on each end, boasted a cathedral and a large lending house on one side, while the other half was dominated by a row of small shops with apartments on the upper levels. All the structures, even the most modest of the apartment buildings, had been constructed of carved stone, with gargoyles and other statues of all sizes perching on ledges and rooftops. Patterned designs decorated every cornice and column. Mora was one of the oldest human cities still inhabited in El Norda, dating back to the time just after the split. Rumors of endless catacombs beneath the city had been tantalizing fuel for the imaginations of Jaden and Matthias in their youth. The first kings of the Ryanthorn family were supposedly buried there, before Halyon Ryanthorn claimed the entire valley of the Willowbar as his kingdom in the year 445 AS, and moved the capital to Eridan. He named the new kingdom Crysin, after his wife. There was a massive museum of history somewhere in Mora that had fascinated Jaden as a boy, and he decided to try and find it. The city was large enough that he knew he would need some directions, so he looked about for someone who might be able to help. A man in a white apron and a baker's hat stood by a folding wooden table in front of the nearest shop, busily loading a variety of bread loaves and pastries into a basket lined with linen. He did not look up when Jaden approached.
"Do this, do that,"
the man mumbled to himself.
6 o'clock, shop is closed. What's that? Time to go to work. Shop is open, my lord. Just for you. You rest when you are dead, I swear to the...
Jaden cleared his throat to get the man's attention. The baker blinked, taken by surprise. He licked his lips and looked closely at Jaden's velvet cloak, sword, and polished boots. A big fake smile came across his broad face, and he spread his hands wide.
"You are just in time, my lord," he declared. "Bastanio has the freshest array of baked goods in the city. I am Bastanio. A fine gentleman such as yourself will, of course, have the refined palate to tell the difference between my bread and their bread."
"I'm sorry. I only need directions."
"You are no here to buy my bread."
"No."
But you have heard of my bread, of course."
"I'm afraid not."
"Then this is your lucky day, great lord. The problem is not in the flour, but in the very wheat itself. That is why they are nothing, and I am Bastanio."
"That is wonderful, but you see, I'm in a bit of a hurry."
"Of course, you are an important lord. I will be fast. Taste my fresh bread, and you will go on your way to your important business with a great contentment, and the feeling you would like to come back, I am sure."
"I really just..."
"Tut, tut, tut,"
said Bastanio, waving his hands.
Is this not the freshest bread you have seen, my lord?
Bassanio tilted the basket with a small flourish, proudly displaying his goods. It looks a little dry to me. An expression of horror came across the baker's face.
Sarundo!
He cried, punctuated by a thunderous clap of the hands. Nothing happened for a few moments. Then, just as Jaden was about to excuse himself, a tall boy only a few years younger than he was appeared in a rush. He had flour on his hands and was wearing a ratty old traveling cloak with a hood.
Yes, father. Where do you think you are going, boy? You said I could have a few minutes before. This bread has been sitting out too long. Bring this fine lord a new bread at once. Then you can rest, boy.
The baker's boy, Sedundo, sighed and went back into the shop.
You are in luck, my lord. We are baking late tonight. The valiant men of the city leave on the morrow to make a war for the Ryanthorn, boy. When the vile wizard blasts them with his fire, at least they will be well fed, no?
Jaden frowned. It had not occurred to him that some people might not think they could win in Eridan. He did not know how to explain to Bassanio that Grisland was not likely to be there when they arrived without revealing his identity, so he remained silent. The last thing he needed was for the boisterous baker to proclaim his presence to every passer-by. He might never make it to the museum then. Looking around the street, he noticed several people going about their daily lives, a sight he had not seen during his first glimpses of the city. A man in the green and brown uniform of a soldier was embracing a woman wearing a long, light pink dress in front of an open doorway. It was obvious by her jerky movements that the woman was crying. The man held her against his shoulder, gently stroking her hair. With his mind focused on retaking his stolen home, he realized shamefully that he had not thought once about how the battle would affect the people of Mora. How many women would be left widowed because of his decision to march? Would the woman in the pink dress be one of them? Would the soldier who held her so delicately in his arms, as she sobbed away her grief, be among the dead? All of this was Grisland's fault, he reminded himself. The wizard had started this war. If someone did not stand up to him, how far would his reach grow? How many more lives could he destroy during his immortal reign? If he was in league with the other side, perhaps he intended to help the demons come to Alnorda. They would commit worse atrocities against the humans that they hated than Grisland could ever be capable of. Though lives would be lost and families destroyed, he was resolved to fight. Tomorrow they would march. He did not realize that Sedundo had reappeared until he turned to find the boy and his father staring at him with a mix of fear and concern. Sedundo held a steaming loaf of fresh bread out for him to take. Jaden exhaled the air he did not realize he had been holding, letting out the tension that had so quickly taken hold of him. The bread did smell wonderful, even if he was not that hungry yet. "I'm sorry, but I have no money with me," he told them truthfully. Garrod had lent him a more than modest purse, but he had left it in his room. The baker's smiling face quickly turned dark. He put his arm around the boy and glared.
"There is no need to mock me, my lord. If you do not want my bread—"
No. The bread smells wonderful, but I really—" An idea came to him as he looked closely at Sedundo's attire. Dressed as he was going to attract far too much attention to move about at his leisure, and Bassanio only thought he was a lord. People did not react quite the same way to him in Eridan, not even the people who did recognize him, but Mora was much more remote, and there were not so many lords that they were seen on the streets every day. Technically, there had been no lords at all in Crysin since early in his father's kingship, but the people still used the term to describe those with land and old money. He had also not been about to take the throne when he was in Eridan.
"Well, my lord, how will you pay me for my bread?"
Sedundo was a little taller than he was, and bigger in the waist, but still... 10 minutes later, Jaden emerged from Bassanio's bakery with a new outfit and a fresh loaf of bread. Faded trousers and a tattered cloak were much better suited for his purposes than the expensive fabrics of Garrod's wardrobe. The curved blade of his scimitar looked awkward shoved into the tightly cinched belt that had been employed to hold up his oversized pants, but the cloak hid most of it. Bassanio had eagerly agreed to the clothing swap. The delicately carved silver brooch on Jaden's cape alone was easily worth a week's income for the man, although the baker had grown increasingly wary of his motives and refused to see him pass the door. He pulled the hood up over his head as he left. Though he worried that it might seem suspicious to some, it would certainly be more suspicious to see the Prince of Crysin walking the streets of Mora dressed as a baker's boy, complete with patches of fresh flour. Besides, he told himself, it had rained earlier, and the sky was still mostly cloudy, as usual. No one paid any heed to him as he made his way down the street, searching here and there for the landmarks that Bassanio had told him he would find on his way to the museum. There had been many of them, and the baker had sounded unsure about a few. He hoped he could remember them all, and that they all really existed. A sense of urgency had begun to build inside of him, like a whisper in the ear from an unknown source was driving him onward. He desperately wanted to find that museum. He passed the statue of a man with an axe that was nearly as big as he was, outside of a butcher's shop, and turned left. A large grassy oval announced the presence of the field where children who went to school played a variety of outdoor games, prompting him to turn right. It was a long walk to the row of brightly painted cobblestones that meant he had come to the city's main commercial district. He went another 3 blocks. Bassanio had been almost positive it was not 4, and turned left again. After a set of marble steps leading to a fountain covered with moss affirmed that he was still on the right path, he walked to the end of Pallador Street, and the appearance of a tall steeple informed him that St. Alamon's Cathedral was where it should be, which was right before the museum. The Museum of Eastern History was just as he remembered it. Positioned at the very end of the street, its doors were approachable by a wide set of rough-cut granite steps ending in a half-moon platform. The street formed a large roundabout before the building, where carriages could turn around after dropping off museum patrons. This was crucial for the flow of traffic, since the rear of the building fronted Mora's outer courtyard, and only those on foot could squeeze through the narrow passages on the sides. He remembered his father explaining that it was built that way for defensive purposes, just as the long pillars were carved into the face of the building rather than left exposed where a hurled missile or quake could bring them down amidst the people. Mora was as much a fortress as it was a city. The long windows of the museum offered tantalizing glimpses of the treasures beyond. Reconstructed skeletons of dragons and gigantic animals that had never been seen by human eyes in life decorated the main hall of the first floor. One entire wing was dedicated to early stone tools and weapons made by trolls, the largest collection of troll artifacts in the world. Another was filled with intricate and costly ornaments and armor made by the mysterious dwarves who lived in the mountains far to the north. Those 3 rooms had been his favorites. He started up the steps with an excited gleam in his eye, but quickly slowed to a halt. It was still a good hour before dark, yet there was no movement inside the large building. No one had come through the doors either, and there was very little traffic on the street.
"The museum is closed for renovations, my lord," said a deep voice.
Surprised, Jaden turned to find a big man in the thick brown robes of a monk, with a cowl pulled over his head, standing on the step below him. He had approached without making a sound. "Who are you?" he asked, squinting with the effort of trying to see the other's face.
"I am a simple priest, dedicated to serving the wishes of the great thoughts."
That the man had pegged him as someone with wealth seemed inconceivable. The sword hanging below his cloak must have given him away. Still, it was not a fancy blade, and men wearing swords were a fairly common sight in Mora. "I am the simple son of a baker," said Jaden, perplexed and even a little angry that his ruse had been seen through so easily. "I do not know why you would possibly think that I am more."
"Forgive me. I mistook you for someone else. Since your destination is barred to you, baker's boy, perhaps you would like to visit the temple instead."
"No, thank you. My father says I am not to speak with strangers." The priest lowered his cowl. His face was broad and tanned from time spent outdoors. Tendrils of gray beard wrapped in leather bands dangled below his chin, giving him away as Natirin. His large, flat nose had a number of knots in it, as if it had been broken on more than one occasion.
"I am Malvoden. Now we are not strangers. I am sure your father, were he here, would want you to visit a house of the thoughts."
That was true enough, Jaden conceded. Urion had always been a pious man, thankful to the great thoughts for everything he had. He would often pay his respects to the local temples in the places he visited, and donated generously to many. Looking at the steeple that rose above the simple building, memories came rushing back to him in a flood. A man opened the thick wooden door, beckoning them to enter. The smell of incense mingled with the flowered scent of his mother's hair, as they knelt before a statue with white eyes. An old gray cat crossed the room behind a group of monks. A priest with a thick gray beard tied in little knots. I remember you. You knew my father.
I knew him as well as I could.
Suddenly, Jaden was not so sure he had been trying to find the museum at all. On the contrary, he was positive it was the temple he had been meaning to go to all along. The two were so closely intermingled in his memory that he had unwittingly thought of them as one and the same, his sense of childlike wonder at all the eye-pleasing images in the museum bringing it to the forefront of his conscious thought, masking the other, more important destination. There was something about the temple that was vital to who he was as a person, something that tugged at the back of his mind insistently. He felt a sense of guilt for not seeing it before. "Forgive me. My father would indeed want me to visit a house of the thoughts. I will follow you, of course." The single thick wooden door creaked as the priest opened it by its large iron handle. Stepping through was like stepping into a scene from Jaden's past. The rows of pews were just as he remembered, each bench polished clean, with simple leather coverings. The few windows in the main chamber were nothing more than long, narrow slits with thick, stained glass that let in almost no light. Candles were lit everywhere to compensate, along the walls and around a raised statue of Alamon in the front of the room. An enormous candelabrum was suspended just over the head of the statue, as if the wizard were wearing a crown of fire. Jaden corrected himself. The way the figure seemed to gaze up at the delicate circle of flame, it was more like Alamon was watching a crown of fire. Malvoden continued to the base of the statue. Jaden followed slowly, trying to soak in every detail of the room as if filling in a missing piece of his life. He even caught himself searching for the scraggly gray cat and almost laughed aloud. The animal would have to be very old to have lived this long, if there ever really was a cat, and his mind was not simply playing tricks on him. The memories felt real, though. His host stopped in front of the larger-than-life granite image of the most celebrated wizard mankind had ever known, gazing upward with reverence.
"This statue has stood in this very place since shortly after the creation of the split. It is difficult to imagine the passage of so much time, is it not? So much knowledge. When I led us from Dagmar, people believed that we were mad. Many still do, of the few who remember us at all. We let them believe it, gladly. We even went through great lengths to perpetuate the thought."
Malvoden sighed.
"Your father's death was difficult for us to take,"
said the priest, balling his hand into a fist. The sleeve of his robe caught on something sharp, exposing a portion of his forearm. Jaden noticed that the veins on the man's hand were enormous, bulging and pulsing around thick muscle as he shook with what appeared to be genuine rage. It was clear now that Malvoden hid the stocky build of a warrior beneath his robes. Robes, it seemed, that were as much of a disguise as his own ratty attire. Something glinted silver further up the man's arm. Chainmail? Why would a priest wear chainmail?
"The betrayer will be punished for his deeds,"
said Malvoden with a sudden snarl.
"The pain he has caused shall be visited upon him tenfold in this world, and 20 in the next."
The angry priest turned his glower toward Jaden, who took an involuntary step back. The look in his eyes was not that of a sane person. Malvoden leaned forward, no less intense after his small tirade. He stretched his hand forth and laid it on Jaden's shoulder.
"Are you the one for whom we wait?"
"I don't know what you mean." The sound of a rock slab being moved in the background caught his attention. It was followed shortly by the metallic clack of latches being undone and the sliding of bolts.
"Orm will take you to your ancestors. He is the caretaker of the dead."
Just then, a wiry fellow appeared from a side room. Vicious scars covered his face and head as if he had been horribly burned, and his smile showed that he was missing a few teeth. He was dressed in a dusty gray robe that did not look to have been washed in some time. The skinny newcomer fidgeted nervously, wringing his hands and rocking back and forth on the balls of his feet.
"He does not speak,"
Malvoden continued, calm once again.
"But he will show you what you need to see."
Orm's grin widened, and he gestured for Jaden to follow him into the little room he had come from. Jaden was hesitant, but Orm appeared harmless enough, certainly more so than the unpredictable priest, if he really was a priest. Moving gladly away from Malvoden, he followed Orm into the little room. After the door was shut, Orm immediately bolted and latched the locks behind them. The peculiar robed man pointed to the corner where a thin chunk of granite flooring had been removed. Closer inspection revealed a steep set of worn steps descending straight into the ground. Orange light played against the wall from an unseen source. When Jaden looked at him with confusion, the mute Orm pointed downward. Jaden shook his head. "No, thank you." Orm was insistent, gesturing for him to enter the little opening. When he would not, Orm jumped into the hole and retrieved a torch that had been left burning. He motioned for Jaden to follow. "Where does it go?" Orm pointed down. "I can see that it goes down, thank you. But to where?" Orm scratched his head blankly for a moment. Finally, he made a motion with his hand like a fish swimming down a stream. An exciting possibility occurred to him. "Does this lead to the catacombs beneath the city?" Orm nodded emphatically. The rumors were true. Matthias would have been green with envy. Part of him knew that it was a bad idea to follow the strange man into the unknown depths, but another part, the adventurous part, was ready to leap at the chance to see something that had so captured his imagination as a child. He did not debate the matter long before following the mute guide down the steps into the darkness that lay beyond. The drop in temperature was instant, and he was glad he had traded his cape for the baker boy's ragged cloak. Orm handed him the torch and reached up to move the slab back into place, then took up the flaming brand again and struck off eagerly down the stairs at what could best be described as a prance. Unlike the unending labyrinth of breathtaking spectacle that was Druania, the underground halls they traversed now were neither comfortable nor appealing to look at. Overhanging clay pipes were dangerous obstacles to the unwary eye, whilst small cave-ins caused them to scramble over piles of rubble. He could have sworn they were in someone's unused basement or pantry on more than one occasion, a suspicion that was confirmed when he heard the creak of floorboards overhead. Orm put an index finger to his lips, indicating silence. After they had zigzagged below what felt like a good portion of the city, they entered a large crack in the side of an abandoned well shaft. A circle of bright afternoon light above marked the rim of the old well, and iron rings cemented on the sides enabled them to climb safely down into its depths. They descended at least a few stories, Jaden estimated, until the rings ran out just short of the bottom, where a pool of murky water effectively blocked the way down. Orm swung to the right, gaining a foothold on the ledge of another opening. Jaden followed and discovered the existence of a small tunnel leading away from the well at an upward slope. The tunnel lasted only a short way before it opened into a more spacious, level hall, with smooth, handcrafted blocks of stone forming the walls. The hall itself came to a dead end after 20 paces, before a seamless wall of solid rock. Orm used his torch to light a second brand that hung on the wall to the right, then placed his own in an empty bracket on the left. An ornate, three-pronged dagger suddenly appeared in the little man's hand. Jaden jumped back, readying himself for a fight, but the slender guide only flipped the dagger over casually. Catching it by its middle blade, the longest, he handed it hilt first to Jaden. He accepted the dagger slowly, with no clue as to what he was supposed to do with it. The hilt was woven of thin wire with gold inlay forming the shape of a dragon. Mother-of-pearl eyes seemed to swirl like deep mist, though it was probably just his imagination. The cool metal began to warm in his palm as soon as he touched it, and he felt the tingle of some form of magic flowing from the hilt into his hand, and from himself into the dagger. Without knowing why, he turned to the dead-end wall. Letters that were not visible before began to materialize on the surface. He read them aloud. "Beyond this wall lies the tomb of Gregor Ryanthorn, King of the Crystalwood, protector of the sacred fire, faithful servant to Jin d'Artanelian, last king of the south. Only the heir of fire may enter my tomb, and by the fire will he be sworn to keep from all living beings the secrets that lie within." Below the writing were 3 holes drilled into the rock. Something guided Jaden's hand to insert the strange dagger into the openings. There was a low click as the blades reached their destination, followed by the rumble of a large granite slab as it rotated on a center axis to allow passage into the chamber beyond. Orm did not follow when he stepped through the opening. He expected the tomb to be cold and dank, with stale air that smelled of death. To the contrary, the air was warm and smelled of sulfur. Fire sprang from hidden sources along the walls when he entered, acting like natural torches. It did not surprise him, for he had felt it happening before it happened. 2 rows of pillars led through the rectangular room to an enormous black sarcophagus, crafted from a block of obsidian that looked to be one piece with the platform beneath it. Chains had been fitted into the little notches on the corners of the lid. The 4 smaller chains led to a thick central chain that ran to a pulley in the ceiling, then over to the wall where it was attached to a winch. 10 cranks of the handle raised the lid halfway to the ceiling. Jaden approached the open sarcophagus carefully. Something in the back of his mind screamed at him not to look, that he would be terrified by what he saw. The ancient coffin mocked his fear, its open maw daring him to peer over the glossy black edge and witness the terrible secrets it held. Taking a deep breath, he gathered his nerve and slowly leaned over the side. There was only a note. He reached to the bottom and fished out the age-darkened scrap of parchment. The writing was in the same hand as that which decorated the hidden door at the entrance to the chamber. He tilted the note so it was illuminated by one of the flames that continued to shoot out from the walls, and read, "Heir of fire, he who touches the very essence of the sacred flame, that which was placed deep within the core of this world at its very conception, shall become blessed and cursed with immortal life. Whether the fire courses through your veins at this very moment, or you have yet to touch the stone, know that the only way to escape this fate is by unnatural death. As the first in your line to be entrusted with protecting the stone, I feel that it is my duty to inform you of this. The only comforts I can give are the words of Alamon himself, who explained that even immortality has its limits. No one lives forever, but some of us are given the opportunity to continue serving the great thoughts for as long as we must. It is up to you to decide when your servitude in this world has come to an end. I have chosen to accept my fate, as I hope you will in time. You are never alone in your struggle, young Ryanthorn. We who have known the touch of the sacred flame are bound together in life, as well as in death. Gregor Ryanthorn." He read the note again, a 3rd time, a 4th. The words were clear, but try as he might, he could not bring himself to accept their implications. If it was true, and he was immortal, then so was his father, and his grandfather, Pedric. Was it possible that every Ryanthorn in history had been killed by unnatural means? Or was there a group of them waiting around the corner to have a good laugh at his expense and welcome him into their company? He had accepted that his father commanded some sort of magic, and that it was his birthright as well, but he was no wizard. Was it such a stretch, though, to imagine that such power might come with the inheritance of that magic? Yes, he decided. The journey back to the temple was a blur. Jaden followed the slender figure of Orm woodenly, immersed in his own thoughts. The worst part was that he could never share the knowledge with another, just as his own father had not shared it with him. Despite the final words of his ancestor, he felt quite alone. He wondered if this was another secret that Spirion had known all along and decided not to tell him. Perhaps it was not Spirion's place to tell him. No, he could not blame this on the enigmatic wizard. This was a family matter. Only he had no family. "Oh no," he thought darkly. "No family for you, little prince. You are alone. You should have stayed in your dingy cell, a skinny piece of dirt for the sorcerer to play with. Your new friends are not immortal. They will die taking your precious kingdom back, and you will live forever alone, so that men can die for you again and again and again. Your family is dead. They wait for you. Death." He shook his head to clear his mind of the morbid thoughts that threatened to overwhelm him, and discovered that they were already back in the little room inside the abbey. Orm undid the latches on the door, then slid the bolts free, and they stepped into the main hall where the statue of Alamon was waiting to mock him with its knowledge, watching the crown of fire with its all-knowing white eyes, watching him. Malvoden was there to greet them, his face a mask of seriousness. Behind him, where the pews had been empty before, stood a crowd of nearly 100, all dressed in matching robes of simple brown. Everyone knelt when Jaden came through the door. "What is this?"
"We are the Validians," answered Malvoden. "We have been waiting for you, my lord."